You have been presenting and presenting and presenting, and we're going to have to shut that down sooner or later. But today, not
Well, I was
today.
just going to say, for those of us who in the future watch this, there's been like a heat wave all over, but certainly in the U.S. I think Julie's gotten some damage from that because she gave me not one, but 2 slides.
All right, everybody. Welcome, July 8th, 2026. Today, Good Night Subsite is on the map. The gang is all here. Our agenda for today is to talk about Subsites, obviously, and the little nod here to the book that Mark Cashman and others, I think Sue Hanley was involved, a couple others were involved in. So a little nod to that. We're going to talk about the SharePoint world. It's flat, and for a good reason. Hub before sub, obviously, some mapping capabilities. How do we get from classic to modern from the perspective of subsites to hub sites, and how do we think about that? How you can manage that new architecture, which is actually one of the benefits, and we'll talk about that, and where we are now and what it looks like, the roadmap ahead. So that is our agenda for today. As always, please feel free to come off mute and interrupt or chat or put questions in the chat or whatever, and we will try to address them as we go. And all right, let's move on. Start right off. Fundamental shift in how we use SharePoint. Mark Cashman, why don't you lead us off as the author of the Subsite?
Yeah, I think this slide particularly has been used a lot in a lot of the customer conversations from Sympraxis to addressing the way that people are today or the way that people were, and just trying to identify here's where you're at and here's where SharePoint, the product, in the way that's built out, wants you to go. By nature of some things are being turned off, some things just don't work like they used to, and that there's a better way with some new features and capabilities that you're going to hear throughout this whole session. But on the left-hand side, it's sort of stuff everything into one place and try to manage and disinherit permissions and just build out until you can't really do much more with it except for pull your hair out and want to make sure that you are not stuck in this rut. There is a way out to get to the right, which represents this new modern intranet, where if you're building out, having more sites is okay. Having sites like we talked about a number of sessions ago, where there's this unit of work, which is the site itself, but to then try to manage it so permissions remain the same all the way throughout the site. You're not burying things down and hiding it because that's the only thing you have to at your control, which is, I think, some of the element that people got into trouble with. They got a site, but they didn't get 2 or 3 sites, and then they just did everything that they could within that one site. So they created subsites because you could, and it made sense. It got a new page, you got a new place to put document libraries, you could kind of have a different set of permissions, and maybe it was even easier to do than going back to IT saying, hey, we need a second site, a third site. In this evolution, there's some new capabilities, which we'll talk about next and all the way through, where you can better organize, you can distribute things, and it's okay to have a little bit of a sprawl. And that's where Todd's going to really jump in and talk about how to manage that sprawl. The one last thing I'll say on this slide, and certainly it's ripe for lots of discussion because sometimes you don't get past this slide in a first conversation with a customer, just to identify that there is a new world. The world is flat, and that's not something that you have to prove out by taking your picture of toes hanging over a cliff and looking out into the stars and galaxies. It's just a reality of that it's okay to be a little bit more spread out and not have everything buried so deep. But the last thought on the left is, imagine if this is a file server on premises or in the cloud, and it's the same pattern. I've got one master folder, but then I've got a ton of subfolders that have different permissions, and different people are using it in very different ways, maybe even very different parts of the company, not even an element of the same folder for the same division. Anyway, it's time to move on if you haven't already.
I wanted to jump in.
Yep.
Some folks might wonder if this topic is timely, like if there's people that still need to hear this message. 30 minutes ago, I was out on Reddit and somebody posted a thing in the SharePoint channel. They've got a file share with 1 million files with 1.4 terabytes of content. Gonna put it in 2 sites in SharePoint.
Oh,
like this is happening in real time. This is a very.
There is another Reddit post. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
There was a post in the Facebook SharePoint group about a week ago where somebody was saying, I'm new to SharePoint and I'm going to create a site and I'm going to have 12 subsites and each of them is going to have subsites. And the group politely suggested maybe that wasn't the right way to go.
Perhaps another path. Yeah.
There's
so
another Reddit
it's not
post
just
that
it's not just that people are doing it, but they're probably missing out on a lot of good stuff. Sorry, Julie.
yeah, and there's no, it's okay. There's another Reddit post that actually is somebody knowingly making the argument to stay with subsites. Like, I know about hub sites, but here's why you should stay with hub sites, and this is why I'm staying with hub sites and subsites, and I'm not moving to hub sites. And so yeah, I think it is incredibly timely for those reasons.
I think I have to say, just to
go ahead, Pat.
Moving on.
Last thing. Well, hopefully last thing. No, I was just going to say, I have to say, I in my discussions with clients, I find the use of terminology is often confusing for people too. And I think the subsite conversation has been simplified by talking about hub sites, because you can refer to it as navigation. You can talk about different ways of how it is built out, and it seems to make more sense of how these things relate to each other. At least it has been easier to explain it to clients as the hub site parent child conversation as it did then the subsites.
See, that's the exact reason that it's an important topic. This slide you sometimes don't get off of in conversation. Hands down, it's always something that comes up. And I think a lot of customers that we talk to have the element of they just didn't know they did what they did, and the path out of it, as you'll find out in the rest of the talk, is not always easy, but it is better, we think, in terms of the use case of getting people their own systems or places where they can do their work, and being a little bit less aggressive about permissions and having it just make sense. But moving to the next slide, I think if we can get off this slide, the notion that we're really going to talk about today is hub before sub, and really it's behind two things: the Microsoft product, SharePoint, and certainly the reasons why they're doing it. They're minimizing the ability to create subsites, even to the effect of you used to have your own My Site, which is now OneDrive. You could have created in the past subsites under your My Site, and what fun that is. But just knowing that there's this inability to create subsites, or if you've created them, that there's a way to move to something better. And that's the use of other site types like communication sites and team sites, and blending them under a hub site or multiple hub sites, especially if you have different divisions or ownership changes or just business changes. They're much more easier to shift around. So you've got the flexibility to be able to associate, reassociate, disassociate, any other association. Joining certainly the association of Sympraxis best guidance is where you're at today. Feel free to reassociate yourself to a different association at the end of this call. There is also the ability to disperse governance. So having different sites with different permissions, even under the same hub, is highly encouraged, because you still want to organize maybe a division of hubs or a project of hubs or a whatever makes sense to gather them together. But let the site do its own work with the right people, and then adjust what you need to do around navigation. As you bring in these collections of sites, you don't have to hubify every single site in your whole tenant under one hub. That would be silly, and that would be almost going back to the old model. It doesn't also mean that every single site has to have a hub site that it falls under. But when you do, the benefits that you get, which I think we're going to enumerate a couple of times through different lenses, is you get scoped search, you get common navigation, branding that you can then take advantage of flowing all the way down, and the ability to roll content back up. Now, there's some nuance there in terms of what actually works and what doesn't, but just the notion of being able to collect these sites together, but not have them be so rigid that then you can't do what you want within each site, even to the extent of having different permissions that are easier to manage and appropriate to do so, that then are reflected in how you do things like audience targeting to those sites from the top navigation. There's architecture to think through, but this is the start of this conversation today to say there is a better way to do what you were trying to accomplish with subsites, and for good reason, both with the product changing and just the best practices of doing something a different way.
Sweet. All right, Mark, take us through
Yes.
some more logical structure stuff.
So all of that's great, but what does it mean in real life, right? That's great, really good theory. So this is actually a slide from a roadmap we did for a real client. And so this is how this can often play out. But this is a logical structure. This is every site that we create is that /site/the name. So /site/human resources or marketing or information technology or IT team or marketing team or project A. They're all siblings, but logically we lay them out in such a way that they are related by what they're for. So for example, the intranet has a home site and you've got a key down at the bottom. The intranet root site of the tenant is a home site, it's a hub site, it's a communication site, and then all of the intranet sites are communication sites that are associated with it. There are usually corresponding team sites, which is the purple row toward the bottom. And it's not always a one-to-one. So for example, human resources sometimes is a really big department. So you might have the HR team that works on benefits, the HR team that works on payroll. Those are separate team sites, but they often will feed content into that human resources intranet site. And then so the intranet, that's the intranet side of things. Those team sites at the bottom, I don't really think of as part of the intranet, but it shows the correspondence between where you publish stuff for everybody to read and where you work on the stuff that needs to be published. And then oftentimes we have something like projects. It depends on what business you're in. We've worked with property management companies. They're called, in that case, it's the property hub. Or maybe you're a law firm, so then that's the Matters Hub. And then you have a unit of work, which we've talked about on a previous Ask Sympraxis just in the last few months. What is that unit of work that your organization does? And you may have many different kinds of units of work, but in this case, projects. So you've got project A, project B, etc. And the nice thing about having sites for each of those is that then you can manage the life cycle of that project. Projects begin, they go for a while, and then they end. And if you have a project that you say, well, no, our projects never end, then they're probably not actually projects. They're more like a department team site or something like that. So this is just a way for all of us to sort of think about how all of this fits together. None of these are subsites. There are all legitimate sites. We have the complexity of having in teams, we have standard channels and private channels. Private channels get their own SharePoint site on the back end, so it's not a subsite either. So there's nothing that's automatic that creates subsites. You really have to work at it these days, and you really shouldn't. You should be thinking of, if you've got an urge to go and create a subsite, you should be thinking about how you can solve it with a modern approach.
But while we're on the slide, just to touch base on one of the things that's happening in the chat with the number of hub sites you can have. You can see on this example we're showing, you got the internet, so there's one. You got the project hub, which is 2. But then there's also 2 additional ones in the lower corner there, inactive project hub, which would have its own navigation, its own set of sites, so they wouldn't be surfaced in other areas. And then lost projects hub, which again is kind of on the side. So just on this logical structure, we have 4 hub sites. And that's because the content in some of those doesn't need to be surfaced on the internet itself. So it's fine to have them separate and have separate navigation.
Right. And the nice, and thanks for reminding me about those 2, Patrick. So, projects do have a beginning and an end, but we don't always want to throw away that project site because, we just worked on it last month. We might want to snatch some content out of it for a new project. So we can associate project A with the inactive projects hub to get it out of the search scope in the projects hub, to remove it from the clutter. And we might even change the permissions of that site. but it's still, live and available when it's associated with the inactive projects hub. And then we also want to think about from a lifecycle perspective, archiving and then potentially deleting depending on your retention schedule. So,
Mark,
thank you.
let's address, if you could address, just in the chat, there is definitely some confusion. If Project A is a team site and thereby they have channels, the private channel site creates its own SharePoint site, but standard channels and shared channels are different. Standard channels are just a folder in the document library of Project A, and shared channels, I think, are the same. Is that correct?
Shared channels actually get their own SharePoint site too.
Yeah. Okay. So shared and private get their own site. Standard are just folders in the library.
Yeah.
Okay.
And standard is what most people use all the time. I've found that with some of the clients we've worked with, they've done everything as private channels just because that sounds like the right thing without really understanding that it creates this separate site and a different security boundary, which actually makes working collaboratively hard. So make sure you understand what those differences are before you go and create a lot of channels.
Yeah, and there's also functionality that doesn't exist in either private or shared channels. Taxonomy from the hub doesn't move down, and so depending on which one of either private or shared channel you choose depends on what level of functionality you have. It's not just everything is available that you would have, but that's a totally different conversation.
Yeah, and but it's just worth mentioning because I avoid both of those at all costs, so have no real, and I'm almost always developing and not actually working in the UX, so I don't actually know these things. But no, it's a good thing to point out because there's definitely was some confusion going on there. All right, is that good for this topic? Should we let Todd talk? We're just on a roll with you, Todd, lately.
I think so.
You have been presenting and presenting and presenting, and we're going to have to shut that down sooner or later. But today, not today.
I was just going to say, for those of us who in the future watch this, there's been like a heat wave all over, but certainly in the US. I think Julie's gotten some damage from that because she gave me not one, but 2 slides in this deck.
2 slides, people. 2
it's
slides.
not even my birthday. I can't.
And I even this morning said, Todd, name it whatever you'd like. I don't have an opinion. What the hell is going on in the world?
Had to read that twice. It was it was. So we have this discussion with clients all the time, both online and in person and all that. And there's a lot of pushback. And one of the pieces of pushback is that the user experience changes. People made subsites for a reason, and when we tell them to get rid of the subsites and move to sites, they lose some of those reasons that they made subsites in the first place. So I made this slide. As we can tell, my skills do not extend into PowerPoint. So this is kind of janky, but on the left is kind of like the top 6 things that I see customers push back against when I say you shouldn't use subsites, or you should take your subsites and break them up into sites. And they're like, but, and so that's kind of, and then the right side, the purple side, is kind of the new way to do that. So we'll go down these. We've got a couple of minutes here. So one of the reasons that people made subsites is the navigation is easy. You could go to HR and you could go to whatever, you just drill down into the site deeper and deeper and deeper. And it made it easy for people to start at one spot and then discover the things that they were looking for. But now we've got hub navigation. So now we can have a hub site. We can have all of these sites underneath it. And all of that can, the navigation, you got the breadcrumbs and those kind of things. So it makes it easy for folks to discover things. On the topic of discovering things, search was another reason that people used subsites, because when you would do a search at the top of the site collection, the search scope would be everything underneath it, which was really nice because then you didn't have to do the whole tenant. You could just do the sliver that you wanted. Well, with hub sites, we have that now. You can do a search inside of a hub site and it will be the hub site and all of its children. So you have that same idea. Permission inheritance. We have M365 groups now, and this gets a little fuzzy. I would almost argue that permission inheritance was a bad part of subsites, and that by breaking it up into sites, we're fixing a problem. It was just like inheriting and not inheriting. People have access to stuff they shouldn't have, and all of that kind of snuck into subsites. But with M365 groups, we can put an M365 group into a SharePoint group. for another site if we want to. We can also, you can't nest M365 groups, but you can make a dynamic group at the enter ID level and say if member of, and then say member of M365. So you can kind of nest memberships there. So you can have like an HR group and then, smaller subgroups, things like that. That gets a little ugly, but there are some fixes there. Nested URLs, that was something that people really liked. They loved seeing that trail of URLs up in the address bar to see exactly where they're at. I would argue that flat URLs are better. It gives you some flexibility in moving things around, but you can also make that URL if you want to bake information into that, you can. I would guess in 2026, folks are not typing a lot of URLs into the address bar these days when it comes to this kind of stuff. You're clicking a link in an email or clicking a link in SharePoint or something. Content roll-up is something that was a big one with things rolling up and being pushed down inside of Subsites. There's a lot of ways to handle that now. We've got Hub News, where all the news from Hub sites rolls up into the Hub, highlighted content, that kind of stuff. There are some solutions out there, so don't think you're losing that. Branding is the other one. When you would brand a site, then everything created underneath it would look the same. With Hubs, when you add a site to a Hub, you can get the theme for the Hub site, so you get some of that functionality too. So I think there's a lot of pushback, but I think from the end user side, there's a lot of ways to address those things that we had with Subsites. So I still think it's the way to go. Now I'm looking in the chat to see if there's any unanswered questions.
No, I was just going to say, Todd, just to touch on that, I have definitely used Hub sites for a branding point of view. So if an organization has 3 colors, for instance, and their intranet has 1 color, it's branded one way. The team sites are branded a second way, and those are on a separate Hub site. And then the project sites was branded in a third way. And it just helped the users identify where they were because it was distinctly a different color and a different theme for each one of those hubs. So that's a good thing that you just brought up there.
Yeah.
I use it similarly for when I'm doing project-based work, when we have project-based status hubs. So we create a theme for each status with its own icon. And then as we move those sites to into the hubs based on their status, again, you get that visual cue of the status of that project site because of what hub it's associated with. And I think that is an incredibly powerful thing, especially when you're using things like gray or black or shades that way for like inactive. I mean, that's a very quick, in a very bright color, more of a bright, dark theme for when you're trying to indicate activity, and I think that can really help people understand where they are really quickly. Oh, wait, I'm not in the site I think I am, an original cue. All right, Todd, how do you manage the sprawl?
So I've addressed some of the user concerns, the UX stuff, but then there's always the admin side. And when we tell admins, hey, you should break your subsites up and make lots of sites. And then in the lively discussion in the chat about all the different ways that teams make sites, a lot of admins get freaked out and like, it's too many sites. I can't keep track. How am I supposed to keep my hands around all this? I've got good news. There's tools for that too. And again, I use the same paradigm I used in the last slide because it works so well. Problem on the left, solution on the right. So just site sprawl, keeping an idea on that. There are kind of 2 ways to handle that. One is at the Entra ID level, you can do an inactive group policy, and that group would be an M365 group, which of course is your SharePoint site, your Teams, whatever, that kind of stuff. And say if it's not active every so many days, send an email out to the owner. And so that's one of the ways to keep dead sites from piling up. Another way is if you have the SharePoint Advanced Management, the SAM stuff we talked about a couple of shows ago, that has SharePoint site policies that you can set up to keep track of that, because that's one of the things that's going to happen in a product like SharePoint where the user is so empowered to create new sites. You're going to get these messy ones all over, but there are a couple tools in place to help with that. Another thing that I see admins worried about is just like figuring out how to get to a site when they want to do work on it in the admin center. The admin center has come a long way for that. Now you can group and you can sort and you can search. You can export the list of sites out into another tool. There's just all kinds of stuff inside of the SharePoint admin center to help with that. So that's gotten a lot better. If that's not cool enough for you, if you need to flex your nerd muscles a little more, you can use PowerShell to wrap your hand around it, write PowerShell scripts to, get SPO site and all those kind of things and mix and match and all that. And then like the other one is it ends up being a little bit more work for admins, but I think this is a great way to delegate some of this to the folks inside of your organization. To let the site owners handle some of this, send those things out so they have to justify their sites, that kind of stuff. So I'm good there.
Nice. All right. Well done. Well done. All right, Derek, read the tea leaves. I love this. Hint.
Yeah. So, as we're looking at subsites and hub sites, we're also wanted to take into account all the classic functionality that as over the last few years, we've been seeing sort of fall to the wayside. And like hub sites were announced back in 2017. They made their like worldwide rollout sometime in 2018. That went cloud only, right? That we were discussing this, the break in the code base basically between SharePoint on-prem and SharePoint in the cloud. Dr. Google said that happened in 2016, but I don't remember because I wasn't working with it at that point. But at any rate, so there was really a shift. So now Microsoft is definitely moving into a cloud first mentality. And what we're seeing is all of this older stuff, SharePoint 2010 workflows, SharePoint alerts. Those were all things that came along and are deemed classic, just like Subsites. And we're starting to see things like last September when the publishing templates and the classic site templates got disabled. That was a pretty quick turnaround that happened. 2010 workflows, those disappeared overnight. And so while Subsites may or may not be on the chopping block, we don't know. We are seeing that the not allowing those has been popping up and sort of off and on recently in the last few years. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think it's accelerating is what you're basically saying.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm seeing. Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing the acceleration of all these things. I
think, right now, if you get a new tenant, Subsite creation is off by default, right? You could still turn it on, but it's off. So I think the TLDR here really is Microsoft is looking to eliminate some of this technical debt. And I think if you're currently making decisions about using Subsites, think very long and carefully about that, because we don't know how long that functionality is going to be available and what's going to happen moving forward. So just sort of, read the tea leaves a little bit and see, try to make your decisions.
And it's also, even if you say, okay, but I want to make Subsites today, you're not getting the advantage of all of the investment that Microsoft has done in this modern way of doing things, which is, we've been through a whole bunch of benefits, and there are lots more where, you're sticking to something just because you know it, whereas the world has gone in a different direction.
Yeah, and toAmi's point in the chat, there is no out-of-the-box way to move a subsite to a regular site. Our partner ShareGate has a way to do that, to modernize. If you are using the one, I think, feature maybe that we lament in having lost in the Subsite architecture is lookup columns that then could cascade down into all of those sites. That was a pretty handy ability. Would be nice if maybe that worked across hubs or something like that, but it doesn't. So long story short, the only migration thing that doesn't work well when you're migrating with ShareGate from Subsites into that hub architecture is the fact that if you have those lookup columns that cascade down into those subsites, you've got to come up with a different architecture for that. So it is something to keep in mind if you've done a lot of good IA in your SharePoint setup and you have subsites and you are using those lookup columns across those subsites. That is not going to migrate well, but otherwise it migrates pretty well. And that so that ShareGate tool is a great way to get yourself out of that classic environment, and you'll just have to re-architect for any of those lookup columns. Bunch
And I was just
comments, so I didn't. Go ahead. No, Patrick, go.
Sorry. No, I was just going to quickly say, and you know, in response to that there is no tool. It is that opportunity which we always talk about to evaluate if that subsite is needed. Is that content that can be archived? Can you clean out the junk drawer and start fresh? I mean, these are those conversations. So personally, I find that there is no out-of-the-box tool.
We've had all of that since 2005, Patrick. We don't want to get rid of it. We don't know what's in there. There could be something really important that we haven't looked for in the last 13 years.
I never felt lighter than moving and just throwing away a box that moved with me 3 times that I had never opened in those 15 years that I owned it.
It's valid. It's valid. All right. We got a few resources for you. Managing site creation, a Learn article. Planning your hub sites, another Learn article. And if anybody would like to read it, the Goodnight Subsites book, Bedtime Story by Mark Cashman and Sue Hanley. Rebecca Jackson illustrations. So that is lovely. All right. Next time, July 22nd, communication sites in Microsoft 365. So we're kind of continuing this trend about talking about sites in general. So we'll do that on the 22nd. And then TechCon 365 Seattle is in end of August, and we have a discount code for you if you'd like to join us there. Sympraxis 200 will get you $200 off. And other happenings, obviously. Collab Days New England, registration is open. If you are in the area, want to visit the area, whatever it is, we will all be there in force at Collab Days New England. That's Friday, October 16th in Burlington, Mass. You can get all the details on collabdaysne.org, which redirects you to our brand new spankin' website that has registration and all the details you might need. So definitely check it out. If you're in the area, please, we'd love to see you on the 16th of October. All right, that's all we have for today. Thanks everybody for joining us. See you again July 22nd. Have a great one. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Sympraxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.